Is it a happy day with food in the stomach?
Yes.
Yes, 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 yes. That is wonderful, wonderful news. And doesn't food taste good when you're hungry?
Amen.
I gave the story last night about the lady that said, my 2-year-old will only eat porridge. I said, get rid of the porridge. You should be surprised what they will eat when they get hungry. And you're always terribly nice about it. You don't say, you're not having porridge again. No, you never say that. It's just not there. Where's the porridge? Oh, it's not here this morning, sweetheart. See, smile, 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 smile. Because I have come to the conclusions that the adults dictate the tastes of the children. My children would eat anything. They would eat anything. And my girlfriend said, how come your children eat salad? My children don't eat salad. I said, I think it's got something to do with the chocolate that you gave them half an hour ago. And then she'd say, oh, Barbara, don't be so fussy. It's actually not rocket science, is it? And it's very important because it's not nice when you see the children's teeth rotting in their mouth. It's back to choose your heart, isn't it? This morning we're going to begin our journey on the basic conditions required for healing. And my book, Sustain Me, the word Sustain Me is an acronym. And the acronym is the basic conditions required for healing. And this is the formula. Many people say, Barbara, how do you keep up the pace? I said, I've discovered a formula. And when you abide by this formula, you'll get the results. The second basic law is use of water. The third one is sleep. It was lovely to hear some reports on sleep improvement. Very, very nice. Trust. This takes in all the emotional, mental aspects of disease, to trust in the great God of heaven who made us, who loves us, who guides us. But he's a gentleman. He will never force entry. He always asks for our admission. Abstain. There are some things that must stop if you're looking for optimum performance. Inhale. Do you know, when my daughter and I were brainstorming to get an acronym for these basic laws of health, I got my daughter, I call her my romantic daughter. Her hair was to her knees when she married. She's my romantic daughter. And she came up with Self-Heal by Design. So we had lunch together and we started brainstorming. There's 8 basic laws of health. And we could not come up with a word that did 8. But the closest thing was Sustain Me. And for the A, I had air. And I thought I could split temperance, because temperance means not taking anything into the body that will harm it and taking in moderation the good things. So we split temperance into abstain and moderation. But what were we going to do with I? We still had air. So we're sitting there, and then I went, inhale. So we had our last law. And Genesis 2 verse 7, the Bible says that God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living soul. Beautiful verse. But notice where God breathed. Not the mouth. This is not mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Did you know they don't do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation anymore? If you've done a first aid course recently, they pump the chest. That's what they do. And that is more effective. No, God breathed into the nose, because nose purifies the air, nose humidifies the air, nose warms the air. Mouth does not do that. Now, nose pressurizes the gases, the blood gases. And how it does that, because it's got little tubes at the back of the nose, and that's actually is what pressurizes the air and balances the blood gases. We're going to look at what those blood gases are. So the first law we're going to have a look at in our investigation of the basic laws of health is pure air. Pure air, that's two things. Be mindful of the air that you're breathing, but also the way that you are breathing. So let's look at the lungs. We're just going to look at one lung. The trachea comes down and it splits. One goes into one lung and the other into the other lung. And then there are little bronchioles, and these little bronchioles are all through the lungs. And at the end, they're taking the air, and at the end of every bronchiole looks like a little bunch of grapes. So let me magnify that for you. And these are the alveoli. And the alveoli is where the gaseous exchange takes place. So when we breathe in, it's actually 79% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. We breathe in, and there's a gaseous exchange here. Because all through those little alveoli there's a blood capillary network. We have 25 trillion red blood cells, and there are 270 million hemoglobin on the red blood cell. The hemoglobin is the oxygen carrier, and the hemoglobin has 4 docking sites for oxygen. And when we breathe in through our nose, and this fills up with air, the blood does an exchange. And what it does, I'll show you. So here's the exchange, 4 docking sites. For oxygen to be picked up, there needs to be 4 molecules of carbon dioxide. When there's 4 molecules of carbon dioxide, oxygen is taken in. When we breathe out through our mouth, we lose too much carbon dioxide. So we should be breathing in and out through our nose. And when we breathe in and out through our nose, remember what I said? What the nose does is it balances blood gases. One blood gas, yes, is oxygen. But most people don't realise to be able to pick up oxygen, there has to be a gaseous exchange. And that gaseous exchange is with carbon dioxide. So let's go to the cell. So here's the cell. The glucose goes in. It goes through a 20-step pathway. The 20-step pathway gives us 2 units of energy. The end result of the 20-step pathway is a chemical form of glucose called pyruvate. And pyruvate, as the chemical form of glucose, gets fed into the powerhouse of the cell. This 8-step pathway is called the powerhouse of the cell because it delivers an impressive 36 units of energy. The difference is oxygen. This pathway, no oxygen. It produces energy by the process of fermentation. And in this energy pathway, glucose and oxygen are burnt, and that gives off carbon dioxide. So we've got 2 places where there's a gaseous exchange. One is in the lungs. And so now, let's say we are breathing in and out only through our nose, which balances those blood gases. So we've got our hemoglobin's got our 4 molecules of oxygen, and then the blood comes to the cell wall. Same transfer. 4 molecules of carbon dioxide will allow 4 molecules of oxygen to get in. Now this explains why they discovered that the muscles used in exercise, let's say coming up that hill very fast, the muscles that are mostly used are my quadriceps, is that right? My quads and my calves. And they discovered that these muscles were getting more oxygen. Why are they getting more oxygen? They're getting more oxygen because they're giving off more carbon dioxide. See, it's a gaseous exchange. It's a gaseous exchange. What an incredible body we live in. What's another blood gas that the nose manages, it actually produces, is nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is antifungal, antimicrobial. And when you breathe in and out through your mouth, you don't get any nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is produced in the sinuses. One more thing, which I think is quite incredible, is nitric oxide and carbon... Oh, where's the dye? Carbon dioxide are both vasodilators. What's a vasodilator? Vasodilator means dilates, opens the blood vessels. So when you breathe in and out through your nose, you're getting a better delivery of blood all through your body because these two gases here have a vasodilator effect, opening of the blood vessels. Leviticus 17 verse 11, the Bible says the life of the flesh is in the blood. We need that life all through our body, and believe it or not, nose breathing gives a better delivery of blood all through the body. What you will see, and I'm sure you're starting to see, is everything we need, we've got. We've actually already got it. But there's more. When someone's stressed, often they're breathing like this. Panic attack. Do you know what mouth breathing and high chest breathing does? Is it stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. That's your fight and your flight nervous system. But when you close your mouth and breathe only through your nose, in and out, and breathe with your abdominal muscles, you stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system. And your parasympathetic nervous system is your peaceful, calming nervous system. So if ever you come across someone who's having a panic attack, you know what the first thing you do? The first thing I do is I touch them. I touch them lightly at first. You don't mind if I touch you. I touch them very lightly so they've got my touch. And then I slowly squeeze them. I slowly squeeze their shoulders. I slowly squeeze their muscles here. And that automatically can help to relax. And I say firmly but gently, close your mouth. Breathe deeply, only through your nose, only through your nose. And you will be amazed, within minutes you can get a turnaround with a panic attack. Just by doing that. Just by doing that. So remember your parasympathetic nervous system. And if ever you're challenged and you're feeling a little stressed, what do? 5 in, hold for 3, 5 out, breathe long, slow, deep. We call it God's LSD. Long, slow, deep, with your abdominal muscles. To be able to breathe with your abdominal muscles, we need to have a straight spine. Because if you're hunched, you cannot breathe with your abdominal muscles. And to have a strong, straight spine, we need to have nice, strong core muscles. Core muscles, they're all connected to your spine. So one of the best things you can do for your whole body, well, there's many great things you do, is strengthen your core. And that's nothing to do with genetics. It's us. I'll tell you a quick story my daughter told me. She said that she was listening to a preacher, this is a few years ago in Wisconsin, and he was very fit. Even in his suit, you could see the outline of his pecs. And he was late 50s. He said, I used to be obese. Everyone was on the edge of their seat then. He said, I gave a sermon one day, because he's a pastor, and he said, and everyone's shaking his hand, thank you, thank you. And a little old lady came up and said, I wouldn't listen to a word you say because of the size of you. She smiled and she left. He said, I was cut to the quick. He said, I went home, I joined a gym, I went on a diet, and the result of you see today. No wonder God says in Romans 12:1, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. You know why it's reasonable? Because we are the winners in a body that works. Oxygen. It's the most vital element needed for life. And we can do much to ensure we're getting more oxygen by the way we breathe, by breathing only through the nose. But we can also do much to increase the oxygen content of our body by being mindful of the air that we breathe. Let's make a list of what oxygen does. Oxygen vitalizes. Oxygen invigorates. I'd even go so far as to say that oxygen electrifies. And that's how you're going to feel when every single one of your 75 trillion cells has enough oxygen to get down to there. And one of the most powerful ways to oxygenate your body is exercise. But we're going to devote a whole section to exercise later in the week. Oxygen also soothes the nerves. And I just showed you how you can do that through your parasympathetic nervous system. On the other hand, there's a medical condition called hypoxia. And hypoxia is basically lack of oxygen. And the paramedic looks for signs of hypoxia, which is blue top lip, blue fingertip. You see, when this blood cell goes through the lungs, it takes on a little parcel, which is oxygen. And look at the colour. You see, oxygen gives blood the red colour. So when there's blue top lip, blue fingertip, that means there's a lot of cells that don't have oxygen. And that could be, often it's because of a constriction in the neck. Oxygen forms an unstable union on the blood cell. That's so that it can be dropped again in my toes, in my brain, in my pancreas. So it can be dropped again quickly. But there is another gas, and this gas is carbon monoxide. And carbon monoxide forms a very tight union. And when a person's breathing in carbon monoxide and oxygen, the carbon monoxide grabs first, so that blood cell is not getting oxygen. I used to do a live blood analysis at Misty Mountain, and sometimes I'd see blood that looks like this, because blood should be looking like this. Now, when that blood goes through the lungs, it's picking up oxygen like little parcels. But when that clump goes through the lungs, how much does it pick up? Can you see the surface area that has been lost? And there's a name given to lack of oxygen. It's called chronic fatigue syndrome. A lady said to me, I found the cause of all my problems. I've got chronic fatigue syndrome. I said, that's not the cause of all your problems. That's the result. What could be the cause? Do you know there's many? It's lack of oxygen at the cellular level, but there are many things that could be contributing to lack of oxygen. And one could purely be dehydration. Because when someone had a blood that looked like that, my first question was, have you had any water to drink today? And this was the answer, no. Because often when people are travelling, they don't want to drink, they might need to go and they can't find a bathroom. If that is the case, I can look at their blood the next day and look like that. That's quickly fixed. Just drink water. Just drink water. So some of the symptoms of hypoxia that aren't quite to the blue lip stage are fatigue. Person's feeling tired all the time. Lethargy, can't even get out of the chair. Nausea, not the only cause of nausea, but it is one of the symptoms of hypoxia. Headache, not the only cause of a headache, but it certainly is one of the symptoms. And I find that there are many people today that are drifting in the haze that lies between optimum health and severe illness. They're not bedridden and they're not jumping out of their skin, they're just, ugh. And if you say, how are you? What's the answer? Oh, not too bad. What's not too bad? Not too good. How many people, when you ask them, how are you, they say, fantastic. And if they said that, often people think, what are you on? That's really sad, that the only people jumping out of the skin are on something. So let's have a look at what affects this. It can often be the air that we're breathing. Negative ions are electrically charged oxygen molecule. They have a negative charge. Negative ions are found at the waterfall. How are negative ions made? Water droplets pass through the air, casting off negative ions. So there's three things there: water, movement and air. Wherever you've got water, movement and air, you've got an abundance of negative ions. Remember what they are? Electrically charged oxygen molecules. Waterfalls, ocean waves. So I was very happy when my teenage boys started surfing. Great sport. They're out in the seawater. They have to get up early to get the good waves, which means they have to go to bed early. They can't be partying all night if they want to catch the good waves. And they're getting lots of negative ions. Also, the thunderstorm is another one. And what's the air like in the thunderstorm? It's alive. And especially with a bit of lightning in there, there's even more electrical activity. Also the pine forest. And the reason why the pine forests have more negative ions is because the pine needles are so fine. So you've got a larger surface area. And because they're so light, the lightest breath of wind will get movement in the pine needles, whereas the other leaves, not near as much movement. On the other hand, we've got positive ions, and positive ions have more carbon dioxide in their molecule than oxygen. Yes, we need carbon dioxide. You can have too much carbon dioxide and not enough carbon dioxide. It's where nose breathing balances it. But positive ions are found in the city, and in the city, we've got a lot of people, they're all breathing out carbon dioxide. You've also got some people smoking, and that gives off the gas carbon monoxide. Also in the city you've got cars, that's also giving off carbon monoxide. And often in the city, when you don't have that sunshine and free air going through the buildings, you can have mold. And that also gives off carbon monoxide. I've put the asterisk on the carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide competes with the blood cell for oxygen, causing this. So the more carbon monoxide someone breathes in, the less oxygen that they're going to get. And there are some very sad stories of people committing suicide by putting the exhaust in the car. They basically die from lack of oxygen because the blood cell grabs the carbon monoxide. I always question the wisdom in the city of the joggers on the side of the road where the traffic is. They're breathing in that carbon monoxide. I have found in about 9 cases out of 10 of people that have come to our retreat with chronic fatigue syndrome, and I begin to investigate, that they've had mold exposure. That's why it's very important to check that you have no exposure to mold. For several reasons. And in this lecture we're looking at how the mold gives off carbon monoxide, which again is robbing your cells, your body of that life-giving oxygen. Oxygen is the most vital element needed for life. And we can do much to increase our energy levels by being mindful not only of what the air is that we're breathing, but also how we're breathing, with nose and abdomen. And that's why it's important to have a skirt or pants so you can put your fist in so that you can use your abdominal muscles in the breathing process. So we've looked at the importance of oxygen and how to get it in. Now I'd like to have a look at sunshine. Sunshine is not the enemy in the sky. Sunshine is the doctor in the sky. Here's sun. And in Australia, there's a program called Slip, Slop, Slap. That's Aussie slang. Slip the top on, slap a hat on, and slop the sunscreen on. And that program was set up probably about 30 years ago to try and reduce skin cancer, but it hasn't. Because the fact is, we need sun. Why? The ultraviolet rays from the sun, specifically UVB rays. So the UVB rays from the sun hit a form of cholesterol. Did everyone get that? Cholesterol is not the enemy. It's a form of cholesterol just under the skin and converts it to vitamin D. Since the Slip, Slop, Slap program was introduced, there's a lot of vitamin D deficiencies today. So why do we need vitamin D? Vitamin D is essential in the assimilation and utilization of calcium. And calcium's called the king. And the reason why calcium is called the king is because when calcium gets into the cell, all the other minerals piggyback. Do you have that term? Piggyback? Jump on the back? All the other minerals jump on the back of calcium. Calcium actually pulls all those minerals into the cell. And because it's called the king, a lot of people take calcium supplements to strengthen their bones. Am I right? Psalm 146 verse 3 says, "Put not your trust in princes." Do you know the bones aren't made out of calcium? So the worst thing you can do is take calcium supplements. And what you save on your calcium supplements, you can actually buy the Celtic salt. Because that's what bones are made out of, minerals. They're made of 12 minerals and 64 trace. So what are these 12 minerals? Calcium, chromium, boron, iron, magnesium, manganese, silica, selenium, and sulfur, and potassium, and phosphorus, and zinc, and 64 trace. So it's not rocket science. What do bones need? That's what bones need. So where are we going to find that? You will find that in the Celtic salt. Please be careful buying sea salt because sometimes it's 2 minerals, sodium chloride. Whereas seawater, it's got 92 minerals. The Celtic salt has about 82. That's pretty close. Dr. Robert Thompson, in his book, The Calcium Lie, and in my book, Sustain Me, there's a chapter on osteoporosis where I explore this in a bit more detail. And his book is, I've quoted there. He says the clearest indicator of a creator God is seawater. Because seawater has the exact same mineral balance and proportions as is found in the human body, as is found in the bones. Where else can we get these minerals? Dark green, leafy vegetables, especially the ones we were served this morning. Wasn't that little red leaf delicious? Dark green, leafy vegetables. And you do not lose minerals when you cook them. So whether cooked or raw, you're getting your minerals. But the problem is, and we'll look at this in our after the break where we look at abstain, the problem is people are taking things, and we looked at this on Monday, that are leaching the minerals out. That's the caffeine. Last week I met a lady. Well, she was the lady that was arranging everything. She's quite a beautiful woman, and she would be early 50s. Beautiful skin, vibrant. And then she introduced me to her sister, and her sister looked 10 years older than her. She was so lined and she had this hard voice. I said, "That's your sister. What's the age difference?" She said, 14 months. Do you know, that sister, I could tell straight away, she was a smoker, she was a drinker, and she was a big coffee drinker. Coffee ages women. It leaches the minerals out of their body. And the lift it gives, remember, it's just a total deception. The lift it gives, it actually takes. It's giving on this hand and taking on the other hand. And so there are some things that must stop because they are leaching the minerals. And that's the caffeine and the sugar and the alcohol and the cigarettes. We looked at this on Monday. So what's happening today is people are not having the right salt, they're not eating enough dark green leafy vegetables, and the food that they're eating is mineral deficient because it's not organic, and they're taking all of this. No wonder the bones are falling apart. And we touched on another one yesterday. Remember, we looked at the hormones and I showed you how progesterone's mother hormone, and I did mention that progesterone builds bone-building cells. So a hormonal imbalance can be a big contributing factor to osteoporosis. So I fell and totally broke my radius the 8th of December. I'll never forget the 8th of December. It was broken and out of place, and I knew that something serious was on because it looked weird and the pain was through the roof. And I'm so glad my son Peter, he's taught his little kids to breathe, use breath work. So I'm sitting there with little 8-year-old Sophie, and I've got my hand in a rock pool. Oh, it's so sore. Waiting for help. She said, "Breathe, Nana. 5 in, hold for 3, 5 out." I said, "Yes, Sophia, yes." Anyway, praise be to God for the skill of the orthopaedic surgeon and his pain-killing medication that allowed that to be pulled into place, and then of course the cast. But after 3 days I cut the cast off. Today you've got 2 casts to allow for swelling, so I cut one off. I knew I had to immobilise that, but it allowed me to put comfrey poultices on here, and I put them on for about 3 hours every day. 4 weeks I go to have an x-ray, and when they x-rayed it, just to check that it's all in place, because when the orthopaedic surgeon pulled it into place, these were his very words. They x-rayed it to check, and they said, "Pretty good." That was enough for me. So it wasn't perfect, but it was enough for me, because I knew what the comfrey poultice could do. So at 4 weeks when they x-rayed it, they were very surprised that this 71-year-old woman's bone had just about completely knitted in 4 weeks. That's unheard of. But they wanted to plaster it again because they said it's such a serious break. So they did. And as the male nurse is putting the plaster on, he said, "Do you have osteoporosis?" I said, "No." He said, "Have you had a test?" I said, "No." And he started laughing, and I realised how silly that sounded. How do I know I don't have osteoporosis? Well, I give my body all the right things. And when my foot hit that slippery big rock, it was a huge rock, and I didn't because we've been walking all over the rocks, and I didn't realise this bit was slippery. It had a tiny dip in it, so it must have had water that had just dried. As soon as I touched it, my foot went out, my whole body went up in the air and landed on my wrist. Now, if I had osteoporosis, more than that would have broken. Am I right? In fact, they kept saying, "Is there anything else?" Because it was such a serious fall to be able to produce a total break and out of alignment. So that's my theory anyway. And I believe that a woman my age, very rare not to have osteoporosis, but it's because I keep the formula. And if I keep the formula, I know that I get the results. So your body needs sun because your bones need sun. Because it's sun that pulls that calcium, or gives you the vitamin D to be able to pull the calcium and all the minerals inside the cell to build the bones. But you need to expose the skin to the sun. And please don't have any creams or lotions or potions on your skin when you go out into the sun. So when Jacqueline and I were in Thailand in May, every day we'd go and lie in the sun. We didn't have sunscreen on. I had this. If you've seen one of these, it's called Watch. Is that what we did, Jacqueline? 15 minutes front, 15 minutes back under the umbrella. By the end of the week, I had a lovely golden tan. See, it's a bit of common sense, isn't it? Now, the darker the skin, the more sun you can handle. One, I think you could handle a lot of sun. Yeah. So you're the doctor. You're the doctor. And remember that and no one here's got black, really dark skin, but they need about 10 times the sun that I need. So there's a bit of common sense there. But even dark skin, if they've not seen the light of day, which a lot of skin doesn't now, for 6 months and they go and lie in the sun for an hour, they will burn. You won't see it. You'll see it when they start to peel because it's all patchy. Our eyes need sun because our eyes are an extension of our brain, and our brain needs sun. The ultraviolet rays from the sun go through neurochemical pathways, hit the pineal gland, and it helps you sleep better at night. The first hour of light in a day, it's just so beautiful, isn't it? And with the sunrises and sunsets, it's as if God's drawing our eyes to that beauty. And science now shows that first hour of light in the day resets your circadian rhythm. What's your circadian rhythm? That's the rhythm that your brain runs at. And Dr. Neil Nedley, who wrote the book Depression A Way Out, he discovered that 80% of his depressed patients, their circadian rhythm was out. How many depressed people go to bed too late, so they get up late and they never get that first hour of sun in the day? To be able to do that, you've got to have breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, eat lightly, go to bed early, then you can get up early and access that early morning sun. Never in the history of planet Earth have so many people suffered from mental illness. And this is including Alzheimer's and dementia. This last 80, 100 years, never in the history of the planet have we seen such thing. And one of the reasons is people are not getting enough sleep. You'll see that after the break when we look at sleep. But also they're not getting enough sun. So there's a few reasons why our eyes need sun. The pituitary gland, the ultraviolet rays go to the pituitary gland and help to balance your hormones, help to balance your body clock, help to cause a release of serotonin. That's coming from your pineal gland. That's your mood hormone. It was probably about 15 years ago, a group of scientists discovered a receptor site on the retina called melanopsin. And this receptor site is not involved in sight. Melanopsin absorbs blue light. And when we've got adequate levels of blue light, our tactical reasoning increases, our ability to solve mathematical problems increases, all because our eyes have had sun to bring through to the brain. Now that melanopsin absorbs blue light, and blue light from the sunlight. I don't suggest we look at the sun. Our eyes will tell us not to do that, but just being outside. The rays of the sun are going through the eyes. Technology has blue light, but it's as a different frequency to the sunlight. So sorry, looking at your screen will not give you what the sun will give you. But it's similar enough in that if you wake in the night and look at your phone, the message to the brain is wake up, daytime. It's similar enough in that area. So our eyes need sun because our brain needs sun.
What about sunglasses then?
What about sunglasses? Good questions. I haven't worn sunglasses for about 40 years.
Oh.
If I was going to go snow skiing and it was a day like today, blue sky, sun and white snow, I'd wear sunglasses because the glare could burn your eyes. And if I was a taxi driver, driving in the city where there's a lot of glare. See, driving out here in the country, the trees tone down. You haven't got that glare. So I never say never to sunglasses, but in the next breath I don't wear them. But what happens when you go outside and you can hardly bear the glare? Well, Dr. William Bates, in his book Better Eyesight Without Glasses, he says when you go outside, close your eyelids, put your chin up and face your eyes to the sun. And the rays from the sun go through the eyelids to your eyes. You only have to do it for 30 seconds. Put your head down, open your eyes, and you'll be used to the sun. That's a nice, simple one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's a very simple one. In fact, in his book, Better Eyesight Without Glasses, Dr. William Bates, he nearly lost his license over that because it shows people how they can strengthen their eyes without glasses. And the last chapter is basically the laws of health. And it's in my book too. I've got a whole chapter on the eye in my book. It's Dr. William Bates. He wrote it in the 1950s, and he says the eyes almost cannot have too much sun.
Wow.
Interesting. Now you look at our forefathers, look at 200 years ago, where did humanity spend most of its time? Outside. Were they getting skin cancer? No. Were they getting eye problems? No. That's why we need to know our history. We need to look at our history. And then we need to look at, well, what changed things? We need to all be private investigators, investigating why these things are so. But before I move on, I want to look at one more point with vitamin D. In the 1890s, 80% of children living in North London had rickets. And I've got a photograph in one of my books of 3 children. And forgive me, I'm not a great drawer. They're 3 little girls. 2 had rickets, 2 didn't. And one girl that had rickets, her legs were like that. The girl that didn't have rickets, her legs were like this. And the other little girl, her legs were basically like that. So this is an unhappy girl, this is a very happy girl. 80% of children living in North London had rickets. And they were investigating to try and find the germ that caused it. Did everyone get that? The germ that caused it. And in the 1890s, a doctor wrote an article in a medical journal saying that he believed it was a vitamin D deficiency because the gypsy children don't have rickets. Where are the gypsy children? They're running through the hills. He was laughed to scorn. It wasn't until 1920 that they acknowledged that rickets was a vitamin D deficiency. Then nurses began to give classes showing mothers how to put their children in the sun. Do they still have those classes? No. What are mothers told today? Don't put your child in the sun. They'll get skin cancer. And you know what else is happening? Instead of children climbing trees, instead of children riding bikes, where are they all? They're exercising 2 thumbs.
Right.
That's why adults, please have guidelines in your home. It's like some people don't seem to like the name rules now, so we use guidelines.
Very nice, very nice.
Guidelines in the home. One lady said to me, my little girl, she's 7, she's allowed to have the phone for half an hour every Sunday. I was very happy to hear that there were guidelines in the home. But she said, every day I turn around, she's picked up the phone. I said, it's very easy. Every time she picks up the phone, she loses 5 minutes Sunday morning. Cause and effect, best way to train children. Sunday morning comes, I'm ready, Mother. So sorry, sweetheart, but you used up all your time. You see, it shouldn't be that the mother has to constantly watch the child. And so when those rules come in, she never even has to look at her phone, because the child doesn't want to touch that phone or they will lose their... It's just very easy. And that's how you strengthen the child's mind. It's not how, yeah. So son, we need it. So yes, as soon as the lecture's finished, you'll be able to run out there. We've got some beautiful sun today. What they found in Norway, they found there was an increase in 200% in skin cancer between late 1990s, early 2000s, and they found 2 common denominators. They're not outside anymore. They're not actually getting enough sun. They're inside. Number 2, they use sunscreen. Sunscreen totally blocks the UVB rays. And what they found is that people with vitamin D deficiency, it increased their risk of skin cancer.
Wow. Those princes.
Well, look at that. Those princes. I'll tell you something very interesting just before we have our break. Genesis 2 verse 7, and God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed through his nostrils the breath of life. I want to show you something there. Dust plus breath, and he became a living soul. It's as easy as 1 + 1 equals 2. When the dust goes, what goes? The living soul. The living soul. The Bible says that when we die, we go to sleep. We're sleeping in the ground till Jesus comes. And let's look at put not your trust in princes. Psalm 146 verse 3, I'm sure you'll know it by the end of the week. Put not your trust in princes, neither in the Son of Man, in whom there is no help. His breath goes forth, he returns unto his earth. In that very day his thoughts perish. That's another confirmation that when we die, we sleep. How kind. And then the next verse says, happy is he that hath the God of Jacob has his help, whose hope is in the Lord his God, that made heaven, earth, sea, and all that in them is, and keeps truth forever. I love truth, and I trust you've enjoyed truth this morning. We will now have a break. It is 1:15. We will come back at 1:30, and we're going to have a look at sleep, abstain, and moderation. Thank you. So welcome back everyone. Everyone enjoyed a touch of sun.
Yes.
And the good news is it looks like it's going to still be there when we finish this class. So in this class we're going to have a look, we're going to begin by looking at sleep. I was reading the account of a 116-year-old Russian man, and he was asked on his tips of longevity. So for this 116 Russian man to be able to give the tips on his longevity, obviously he didn't have dementia. Yes. He said, "I rise with the sun, I go down with the sun." And I think that that's an important point. He rises with the sun and he goes down with the sun. And I also liked what he said the next. He said, "And I hold anger to no man." So they were his two main points on why he was still alive and pretty good at 116. Gets us back to the fact that there is a formula. So sleep. What happens when we sleep? And that's what I'd like to go through. What happens when we sleep? There's a tiny little gland in the base of the brain called the pineal gland. Light and dark signals are fed through the optic nerve to a control centre in the brain where your body clock is located. And that body clock communicates with the pineal gland, and according to the light and dark signals that come through, as to when the pineal gland releases the hormones. In the winter time, it releases the hormones between 9 and 2 a.m. And in the summertime, the hormones are released between 10 and 3. And I think you are still on summertime here, is that right? When do you change to winter times? You've already changed, have you? You've already changed to winter times. So that's the winter time. I know in Australia we've changed to summertime, and this is the summertime. So what are these hormones? One is serotonin, your mood hormone. So if you want to feel good, go to bed early. If you want happy kids, what do? Put them to bed early. And then they're getting their serotonin levels. Another one is arginine vasotocin. And arginine vasotocin is a very interesting one because arginine vasotocin puts you into a deep sleep. A lot of people that can't sleep think if they go to bed later, they'll get tireder and they're more likely to go into a deep sleep, but actually the opposite's true. The earlier you go to sleep, the more likely you are to go into a deep sleep. Arginine vasotocin is also our natural painkiller. Isn't that nice to know that we've got a natural painkiller? And that natural painkiller is released when we need it. But it leaves a waste whenever it's used. And if that waste is still there the next night, then you don't get a new release of your natural painkiller. So how do we get rid of the waste? That's where exercise comes into it. In Ecclesiastes 5 verse 12, the Bible says, "The sleep of a labouring man is sweet." So when we do physical workouts in the day, when we're physically active in the day, it causes physical exhaustion and we are more likely to go into a deep sleep. But what the research is showing, when you exercise through the day, it causes a release of perspiration, and in that perspiration is the waste from using arginine vasotocin, our own natural painkiller. I will say it again, and I'll say it quite a few times. Everything we need, we've got. We've got it in us. We just need to know how to access it. The third hormone that's released by the pineal gland in these hours is epithalamin. And epithalamin is a hormone that slows down aging, and everyone over the age of 25 likes that one. Don't look too closely at the rock stars. From a distance they might have brown hair and are slim, but you come close and whoa, the lines. Because what time do they usually go to sleep? Maybe not till 3, 4, 5 in the morning. And some of the rock stars you don't even get to see what they're like because they die early from drugs. It's not a happy life. And you know, Whitney Houston, what a magnificent voice. And she died at about 45, didn't she? Yes. Yeah. It's very sad how that lifestyle destroys so much of our magnificent talent. Epithalamin slows down aging, but epithalamin increases learning capacity. And you will discover, we're going to be speaking on the mind in the town on Thursday night, but we'll also be looking at it in more detail on Saturday morning. And you will discover that our mind should be getting brighter, smarter and wiser with age. But what is the view today? That people are getting dumber as they get older. But that's not God's plan. I haven't read about Alzheimer's in the Bible, have you? No. So we should be learning new things right up until the day we die. And one way to help our bodies learn new things is to go to bed early, to get a release of epithalamin, which increases learning capacity. The fourth one is melatonin. And melatonin is called the fix and rejuvenate nighttime hormone. Melatonin is responsible for the increase in healing in those hours. The increase in the body's reviving and restoring in those hours. Now you might remember this, you might not, because I am guilty of information overload. Last night we looked at the microorganisms in the gut, and we looked at how those microorganisms are responsible for the release of melatonin. Sunshine increases the output of those hormones at night because it's the light and dark signals that are fed through the optic nerve to cause a release of those hormones. Those hormones are made from about 80% water. So if we're dehydrated, we're not going to get that release of hormones. Sleep, we need to go to bed early to access those hormones. Stress, anxiety, worry, isn't that the one thing that stops sleep? And we're going to pursue that a little bit more. Abstain. Caffeine cuts the release of those hormones in half for 6 hours. Alcohol causes a 40% reduction in the output of those hormones at night. So that red wine might put someone to sleep, but they're going to wake with half-charged batteries. No wonder people that have been drinking alcohol, how do they feel when they wake up? Well, we've got a saying in Australia, like something the cat dragged in. Not too good, not too good. So there are some things that stop because they interfere with the output of those hormones. Breathing through the nose. There's a simple thing that you can try to ensure nose breathing in the night, and that is taping your mouth. You don't actually have to go like this. You can do a little tape here. So last April, little Sophia, who's 8, she stayed with me, and she said to me, she had a bit of a cold. She said, "Nana, have you got some tape? I've got to tape my mouth up. I've got a cold." She knew that taping her mouth up would clear her nose. So that little 8-year-old girl, her education far exceeds what many people's education is. So I gave her tape, mouth, I didn't give her mouth tape, she just wanted masking tape. And she laid down, taped her mouth up, nodded, smiled, went to sleep. In the morning, untaped her mouth. Kept my nose clear all night. I've got a book that I bought because it was referred to in the book Breath by James Nestor, and it's George Catlin. He lived with North American Indians for 6 years in the 1930s. And he said they were strong, it wasn't the 1930s, it was the 1830s. because by the 1930s, unfortunately, many of the Indians, it's a very sad history what happened to the Indians. It was the 1830s for 6 years, because the book is written in Old English and I can hardly understand it, but I can because I'm used to the King James Version of the Bible. And he said that every tribe that he stayed with prized nose breathing. He said, he gave one story, he said there was a dispute between a white trader and an Indian and they were going to have a fight. But thankfully it was resolved. And he went up to the Indian later and he said, weren't you worried? That white trader's twice your size. And the Indian said, no, I would have won. He was a mouth breather. That's how much they prize nose breathing. And the Indian women, George Catlin said, would nurse their babies to sleep. And when they were asleep, they'd lay them down in their little beds and then they would gently press their lips together. And they would keep holding them until they were sure that the baby was nose breathing. You will get a better sleep if you nose breathe. In fact, sleep apnea and snoring would just about be a thing of the past if people nose breathed. So looking at what increases the output of these hormones, nutrition, we need to have a nourishing diet because the food that we eat lays the foundation for all the things that are made in the body, including the hormones released from the pineal gland, moderation in all the good things, and exercise. Exercise increases the circulation of the blood to the pineal gland. Exercise exhausts the body so that it sleeps better at night. And exercise causes a release of the waste from using arginine vasotocin. So it is in that way that the laws of health are able to increase the output of the pineal gland secretions at night. It was in about the 1950s that many scientists were beginning to do research on sleep. You see, sleep was never a problem, and I guess it was in about the 1950s television came along. Would that be right? Yeah. Television came along. I think I was born in 1953, and it was when I was about 20 I saw the first colour television. So it was black and white, mostly in the 50s, 60s. But isn't it interesting is that's when sleep started to become a problem. And what they did was they put electrodes on rats. They first started with rats because their cycle is very similar to humans and they only live 2 years. And what they found was there are periods of night where the eyes flickered, and there are periods of the night where the eyes were still. And whenever the eyes flickered, the brain was busier, and whenever the eyes were still, the brain was a lot stiller. Then they started to do experiments on volunteers, even on themselves, and they found the same thing. And they called the flickering time rapid eye movement time. And they called the non-flickering time non-rapid eye movement time. And they discovered that in the non-rapid eye movement time, there's a courier service. So what do we mean by the courier service? Let me draw the brain for a minute to show you. Here's the brain from side on. Here's the hippocampus. And it's in the hippocampus where we store all the day's memories. So everything that's happening to us today is being stored in the short-term memory unit. But while we sleep in non-rapid eye movement time, those memories are couriered up to the cortex, and it's in the top of the brain, the cortex, where the long-term memory unit is. What also happens in non-rapid eye movement time is there's a cleaning system. Dr. Matthew Walker, in his book Why We Sleep, he explains that the brain cells shrink in that time, allowing for more fluid around the brain cell. So what's been cleaned up? Waste from neuronal activity, waste from combustion of glucose and oxygen in the brain cells, and even to the point of they can clean up negative emotions. So what happens in rapid eye movement time? In rapid eye movement time, there's a filing system. I found it fascinating because Dr. Matthew Walker is an atheist, and when he studied sleep, he discovered that our brain files the memories in perfect order. And he made the comment, this is exactly what he says in the book, it's almost as if sleep has an intelligence. And if I was talking to him, I'd say, that's right, mate, it's called God. Now, I know from training as a psychiatric nurse that there was a saying, nerves that lie together fire together. And what they found in the filing system, that all our negative emotions get filed together. All our positive emotions get filed together. Have you noticed when you think of something, then other things come up all related to that? That's because they're all filed in a certain order. Fascinating. And what Dr. Matthew Walker also put together was that dreaming plays a role in how our memories are stored. Now, I think I told you that only a week ago my 25th granddaughter was born. She came a couple of weeks early. Do you know, the night she was born, I dreamt that she was born, and I dreamt my son was breastfeeding her. Do you ever wake up in the morning and think, did anyone know what I actually haven't told him that yet. It just came to me, see, and that's what you'll find. You'll think of one thing and then it'll be like a network comes up of all the things that are connected to it. That's because all our memories are filed in a certain order. What also happens in rapid eye movement time is there's a consolidation. There's a consolidation of the things that we learned through the day. A consolidation or a confirming or a settling in of the information we receive through the day. That's why when you're learning new things, to go to bed early, it allows it to settle or to be confirmed more in your brain. This is also invention time. The night before last, I was awake for a little more than an hour, 1 o'clock in the morning, and the things that were coming into my brain. I woke up in the morning and I said, right, Jacqueline, now we've got to do this and we've got to pursue that and this. I'm the daughter of an inventor. I wonder whether Dad got all his inventions in rapid eye movement time. What they discovered is that these two time frames happen in 90-minute cycles. At the end of not only his research, but exploring all the other researchers, Dr. Matthew Walker came to the conclusion of something he was not happy about. 8 hours. 8 hours a night is necessary for all of these systems to be played out. Notice what I said, he wasn't happy with the conclusion. He was hoping that it could be 5 or 6, but no. No, it was 8. So we've got a choice. It can be 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. Or it can be 9 to 5, that's probably my favourite. Or at a stretch it could be 10 to 6, maybe in the summertime. Notice how God gives us choices. So let's have a look at how these work together and do the 9 to 5. So 9 to 10:30 is the first 90-minute cycle. So we're going to have a look at how much non-rapid eye movement is happening in that time and how much rapid eye movement is happening between 9 and 10:30. 80% is non-rapid eye movement time and 20% is rapid eye movement. So the next 90 minutes is 9:30 to midnight. And at 9:30 to midnight, 60% non-rapid and 40% rapid. So moving on, we come to right in the middle of the night, which is 12 midnight to 1:30. And it's about 50-50 in the middle of the night. Moving on, we come to 1:30 to 3 a.m. On 1:30 to 3 a.m., it's now 40% non-rapid and 60% rapid. And then the last 2 hours of the night, this is 3 to 5, it's 20% non-rapid and 80% rapid eye movement. This explains so much. So some of the things it explains is if you wake in the middle of the night, maybe midnight, you often don't remember your dream. But if you wake at 3, 4 or 5, you often remember your dream. One lady said, I don't dream. I said, we actually all do, and you only remember it if you wake up in the middle of it. That's often when you remember it. It also explains what they're finding with people with Alzheimer's. So in the front part of the brain, which takes up about 1/3 of the brain, is where our reason, where our intellect and judgment takes place. And this is also where we make our decisions. So that's called the will. So this is the front part of the brain. And what they found with people with Alzheimer's, little calcified deposits build up on the front part of the brain, and they're called amyloid plaques. And there are 2 very famous people who spent the last 20 years of their life with severe Alzheimer's. One is Ronald Reagan, and the other is Margaret Thatcher. Both of them boasted that they only needed 5 hours sleep a night. You see, it's a total deception. So when we go to bed, especially those hours before midnight, so what we need to aim for is 2, ideally 3 before midnight, because it's the hours before midnight where the cleaning system is most active. And that cleaning system is cleaning up, mopping up any little beginnings of amyloid plaques. And by the way, when someone has the front part of their brain clumped up with amyloid plaques, how's their reason, intellect and judgment? It's just gone with people with Alzheimer's. They don't have it. Now, there are a few reasons for Alzheimer's and dementia. This isn't the only cause. And tomorrow, we're going to be looking at the acid-alkaline balance in the body, and you will see some of the things that are causing calcified deposits to develop. So it is like with any condition or situation, it's usually not just one thing. It's a little bit of this, and a little bit of that, and a little bit of this, and they all come together to form what's happening. But it is certainly a factor. Michael and I have a good friend who's showing signs of dementia. And he, for the last 40 years, he never goes to bed before midnight. I think if Margaret Thatcher knew what I've shown you today, I think she would have made steps to get to bed earlier. Now look at Margaret Thatcher's mind, brilliant mind. She was showing brilliance in school and university. And yet, look how she ended her life. And some would even go so far as to say, why would God allow that to happen? You know, it had nothing to do with God. It was the choices she made, but many are sick through ignorance. But then again, we've had these sayings for centuries. You know, someone starts to get sick, and what's the comment? Oh, they're burning the candle at both ends. And when you burn the candle at both ends, what eventually happens? The flame meets. And the other saying, turning night into day. And what's a very old saying? Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy and wise. So we have had these old sayings for, even I'd like to go so far as to say, for the last couple of 100 years these sayings have been thrown around. Another one is an hour before midnight is worth two after midnight. You may have heard that saying. And now science is proving all of those old sayings to be true. Why did they have those old sayings? Just through observation. Because when someone does go to bed early and get up early, they certainly are the ones that are wealthier and wiser. Upon reading the book Why We Sleep, I was challenged with the fact that I wasn't getting enough sleep. I was getting 6 hours sleep a night. So I thought, well, if I want the results, I've got to start training myself into 8 hours, and I did. What I observed is what wakes me and keeps me awake is the chat room. Have you heard of the chat room? Well, let me take you into my chat room. Right here at the moment, in a week and a half, I'm flying home. It's very exciting. So in a week and a half, I'm flying home. So where's my chat room? Okay, now when I get home, I'll do this, and I've got to check the garden, and I've got now I'm going to be repacking my bag. Now I must make sure that I get this one to Sophia, and we're going to the wedding. Chat. You've got to get out of the chat room, and I think everyone in this room can identify with the chat room, because I think it's something we are all challenged with. And I decide to solve all the problems of the world in my chat room. But if I don't get out of that chat room, I won't sleep. So how do I get out of my chat room? So I'm going to share a few ways you can get out of your chat room. And the ways I'm going to share with you are things that people have shared with me. But how I get out of the chat room is I go through my memory verses. So I love memorizing, and my favourite memories are from the Bible. And my longest one is James chapter 1. It's 27 verses. It took me about 6 months to memorize it, but now it's solid in my brain. So I can't be chatting and going through James chapter 1. So what I do is I start going through that, and I have to keep my mind on it to know what the next word is, what the next verse is. And then in the morning I think I got to verse 13, halfway through, and then I was gone. The old saying is counting sheep jumping over a fence. Another one is counting from 100 backwards. And my son James, he told me this is what he does. He lies there and says, don't think, 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 don't think. One lady told me that she lies there and she pictures her great aunt. She loved going to her great aunt's house. She had the most beautiful rose garden, and they'd have cups of tea in china teacups out in the rose garden. And see, can you see, once you start thinking of that, your networking will start. And you'll start to remember little things that, and she used to make the most beautiful sponge cake. and so the networking will go on, and so you've got out of the chat room. Adriana Huffington, she wrote a book called The Science of Sleep. She says, lie there and list all the things you're thankful for. And this is certainly a Bible principle, 1 Thessalonians 5:18, in everything give thanks. I'm so glad that I can't sleep, Father in heaven, because now I can talk to you. I'm so glad I'm not in a Siberian work camp with newspaper for bedding. I'm so glad I'm in a comfortable bed. And people say to me, how? Don't you get homesick? Do you know I don't let myself? If I were to dwell on that half the day, I'd get homesick. Sorry, I heard talking. It's upstairs. So you can see what you can do. There's a whole lot of areas. It's just working out what works for you. Some people hum songs, hum hymns. So it's just engaging. You know, when you're driving, you've got Well, if you've got a manual, you've got first gear, second gear, and you've got to get to the next gear. But if it's automatic, you might go from drive into reverse, and that's what you're doing in your brain. You're just getting out of drive and you're going into neutral. It's a decision that you make in your front part of the brain. No, I'm going to put that on the shelf. You could put a soft light on and get a boring book. The life habits of the Australian platypus, or the life habits of the Australian kangaroo. Just something not terribly exciting. I know that reading always puts me to sleep, and when the book falls on my chest, then I put it aside and turn the light off. And that's one way I can get out of the chat room, especially if the chat room's really gone into overdrive. So the chat room is one of the main reasons people don't sleep well, or they don't go back to sleep. And that's how I trained myself back into 8 hours. What Dr. Matthew Walker shows is that 6 hours is a deception because you feel okay. 4 hours, you do not feel okay. But 6 hours, you feel okay. But it is actually not okay. And you don't feel the full effects straight away. It's like a cigarette. You don't get lung cancer after 1 cigarette or 3 cigarettes or 4 cigarettes. You don't get liver cancer after 1 drink of alcohol, but a few years later. And it's exactly the same with sleep. If you're not getting enough sleep, it slowly builds up and it has an effect. One lady said to me, well, I've been going to bed at midnight. She said, I know that I can't just go to bed at 9 o'clock. So what she did, and I think this is quite reasonable, she just went to bed at 11:30 every night for a week. And after a week, she went to bed at 11. And then after another week, she went to bed at 10:30. So she slowly eased her body, her brain, back into that. If you want to go to bed by 9, you've got to be thinking about it at 7. You can't decide to go to bed at 9 at 5 to 9. You won't be in bed by 9. So it's just looking at all the things that you can do. And please get the technology out of your bedroom. If you charge it, it must be charged in the next room. If you're on call, or sometimes we have to get up very early for an early morning flight, you can still turn your phone off, the sound off, and your alarm will still go on. And it's not the odd day you might do that. But if you have to have an alarm every night, and we are the only creature on the planet that wakes up to an alarm, then you can put it outside into the hall. But what I find is we are creatures of habit, and your body can get into that habit. So that's how you can increase your sleep. And there's one thing that'll definitely stop sleep, and that's getting annoyed with the fact that you can't sleep. You'll never go then. And that's why Adriana Huffington, in her book, The Science of Sleep, she says, lie there and list all the things that you're thankful for. And again, the brain does networking. Once you start to think of the things that you like, all of the things will come up. Part of the laws of health is that there are some things that must stop. But there are also some things that should be done in moderation. Moderation basically in all good things. Yes, you can get burnt if you stay in the sunshine too long. Yes, you're going to have to be visiting the bathroom all day long if you overdo the water. You're going to be miserable if you overdo the food because the stomach will speak to you. So all good things should be done in moderation. All work and no play makes Jack a very dull boy, and all play and no work makes Jack a very poor boy. And I'd like to suggest children that don't learn to work, when they hit the workforce, they're useless. My sons will not apprentice young men anymore. They're useless. Why are they useless? It's not genetics and it's not a germ. It's the fact that they were not taught to work as children. And when do children love working? When they're little. Have you seen all these little homeschool kids? I came in this morning to put my washing on and one's busy down under the sink and another couple are busy getting the towels. Love it. And how do they feel? Now, children don't always like work, but you know, when you don't let them work, you deprive them of the joy of accomplishment. So it's very important to teach them to work, then you'll have time to play with them. So it should be a balance. I love God's perfect mathematical formula. 8 hours to work, 8 hours to play, 8 hours to sleep. Did everyone get that? Because our children rise and leave very quickly. And there are so many parents that are now sorry that they didn't spend more time with their children. And you know how you start to spend the time? By working with them. That's where you start. And then you'll have time to play with them. The play comes after the work. I was talking to my daughter one morning. She's got 7 children, and this is a few years ago. I said, "How are you going?" And she said, "Oh, I just mopped the kitchen floor and the kids came in with their muddy boots." I said, "What are the kids doing now?" She said, "Mopping the kitchen floor." And that's exactly who should mop the kitchen floor. You know, we've got too many helicopter parents, yeah? And then the children actually do not learn to think. They don't learn to think. But there are some things that must stop if you're looking for optimum performance. So what must stop? The refined sugar. The refined sugar is what is the most responsible for the diabetes we're seeing today. As you'll see, there are other things that have come in, but there was no diabetes on the planet till sugar was refined. Hippocrates has no mention of it in his writings because sugar wasn't refined. Started to be refined, I think, about the 15th century, and that's when they set up the slave trade. Did you know that the slave trade was set up to man the sugarcane fields? Yeah. And they would get shiploads of Africans and they would take them to the West Indies and they would get the rum, they would get the molasses and the sugar, take it back and trade for more slaves. It's a shocking history. There is a movie that has done it beautifully. It's called Amazing Grace. Have you seen the movie? It's done with all Shakespearean actors and actresses, so it's very beautifully done. But it basically gives the history of the slave trade. And the good news is it doesn't go into any gruesomeness, which of course there was a lot of gruesome things happened. But it basically just looks at Parliament in London and how William Wilberforce, how he battled for stopping the slave trade. And it took him 20 years before finally he was able to abolish the slave trade. Mm-hmm. And on the wall of the dungeons in the plantations, it says, Cain, that's the sin fixed against the white man. Yeah. But you know, in the book, The Amazing Grace, in the Parliament, one politician gets up and says, we have no proof that the slaves aren't happy. Yeah. Such deception, such deception. The slave trade has been abolished, well, mostly, but there are many today who are in slavery to sugar. And we get them at Misty Mountain. The first 24 hours can be a little difficult because they're the cravings of sugar. It's a highly addictive substance, and it certainly wears out pancreases. But not far behind it is the hybridized wheat of the day. The hybridized wheat was changed to produce a plant with a high yield of grain, and they did it to help save the starvation crisis in Africa, Mexico, India. And so the wheat of today, I mean, when I was a child it used to grow that tall, but you notice now it only grows about 2 foot tall, and it's got a thick stem because That allows it to hold the heavy yield of grain, which sometimes is 6 to 8 times more grain per acre. That's 6 to 8 times more grain per acre for the farmer. He's got to pay his bills. So in 1976, Dr. Norman Bourlag got a Nobel Prize for this hybridized wheat. It was rushed through with no safety studies. Sounds familiar? Rushed through with no safety studies, and only now they're starting to see the problems that this hybridized wheat has caused. So what I want to show you today is what the hybridization of the wheat did to the starch structure. Tomorrow, when we look at the acid-alkaline balance, I'm going to show you what it did to the gluten or the protein structure. So in the hybridization of the wheat, it created a starch called amylopectin A. And amylopectin A gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast, then you got a corresponding drop. That's the amylopectin A. Amylopectin B is found in bananas and potatoes, and if you know the glycemic index of bananas and potatoes, it's fairly high, so it gets also a drop, but not as quick and not as low as the amylopectin A. Amylopectin C is found in chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed beans, cannellini beans, and amylopectin C gives a lovely, steady rise, maintenance, and a slow drop. What does every cell in our body want? It wants the C. Tonight, in the big hall, I'm going to be talking about diabetes, and I will be explaining this again tonight, so you'll have the advantage of hearing it again. And you have a look at diabetes. It's just exploded since the 1990s. See, 1970s, it went, by the end of the 70s, this wheat went worldwide. By the 1990s, all wheat, breads, pastas, pizzas, cake, all the hybridized wheat. And the explosion of diabetes has happened since the 90s. Yeah.
Correlation between diabetic and Alzheimer's.
What's the correlation between diabetes and Alzheimer's? They're calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. because the brain can only hold a 2-minute supply of glucose. So when you get this quick high and you get that quick low, within 2 minutes the brain's not working. So let's have a look at the glycemic index of foods, and we'll look at this again also tonight. The glycemic index of food is how quickly the glucose in the food is released into the blood. Baseline sits at 55. So anything under 55 is considered low, anything above 55 is considered high. So 26 is where all your berries are. Blackberries, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, all your berries sit at 26. 25 is grapefruit. And that's no surprise. Where does sugar sit? Sugar sits at 59, and that's no surprise. But what is the surprise is that white bread, white pasta, so white wheat, it sits at 69. White bread will get the blood sugar level up higher than sugar because of the amylopectin A. Whole meal, whole wheat sits at 72. How could that be? How could that be? Well, because it's not refined, it's got more amylopectin A in it, and it's the amylopectin A that gets the blood sugar level up. And that's why we've got the hybridized wheat up there. Do I eat hybridized wheat? Sometimes, but not much. I don't think I've had any for about 3 weeks. Sometimes if Michael and I go out for a meal, we might have pasta. But if I had diabetes, I wouldn't touch it. Now the good news is, here in America, you can get an amazing bread, and I think that they're going to serve it later in the week. It's called Simple Needs. And it is a gluten-free sourdough, and they'll ship anywhere. Looking at the things that must stop and why they must stop, caffeine. Caffeine interferes with the neurotransmitters in the brain. So here's the brain cell, and there are 1 trillion of these in the brain. And these nerve cells, they don't touch each other, they communicate with each other via little chemical messengers. So here are the filaments that come out of the nerve cell, here is the boutons, here is the next nerve cell. And these little neurotransmitters flash from cell to cell, bringing the messages. They come in from one nerve cell, they're encapsulated, they go down the arm, into the boutons, then they're released out to the next nerve cell. What caffeine does is it disrupts the neurotransmitters. One is adenosine, and adenosine is a neurotransmitter that acts like the brakes. And when caffeine goes in, adenosine levels drop. You know what that means? Brakes are failing. The brain says, what are we going to do? Because the brain runs according to precision balance, so the brakes are important. So it develops extra receptor sites on the dendrites for every bit of adenosine that comes through. The person comes to evening shade health retreat. We don't serve any coffee. Adenosine levels go back to normal. The receptor sites get flooded. Oh, does that hurt? That's the coffee headaches that so many get. The other neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that has to do with brain function, and it rises when someone has a cup of coffee. Well, isn't that good? Well, because the brain runs according to precision balance, as soon as you get that rise, the brain goes, oh no, we're making so much acetylcholine, stop making so much. Then you get a drop. The third one is dopamine. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter that rises when someone has coffee. And dopamine is your pursuit of happiness, your pursuit of reward hormone. And this is why so many people say, I love my coffee. It just gets my brain going. Yes, that's acetylcholine. Yes, just makes me feel good. Yes, that's the dopamine. But it's not long before the acetylcholine drops. And eventually the dopamine is exhausted. To take a cup of coffee to give energy is like taking out a loan to pay off your loan. Eventually there's nothing left. And how many people in their 50s say, I've got no energy? And then when we investigate, we find they've been drinking coffee for 30 years. Well, no wonder they've got no energy. They've exhausted their adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands sit on top of your kidneys. And your adrenal glands are that's where your fight and flight hormones come from. So when you continually take coffee, you're continually leaching your bank account, so eventually you've got no get up and go. It's like robbing Peter to pay Paul. There's going to be a deficit. Another thing that must stop is alcohol. And one of the reasons why alcohol is so dangerous is that it's a neurotoxin. Neurotoxin means brain poison. Brain poison means it kills brain cells. And the brain cells we have now, we have for life. We've got to look after them. Mercury is also a neurotoxin. I can't believe that they used to put it in childhood vaccines. In 1998, and you'll find this information in the book Stop Autism Now by Dr. Bruce Fife. In 1998, they banned mercury from the childhood vaccinations because of so much damage. But the pharmaceutical company had a stockpile. So even though it was banned, children were still vaccinated for about the next 10 years with the stockpile. Ugh, it's criminal, isn't it? That's why I say I believe most doctors are ethical, but the pharmaceutical company is not ethical. It is not. But the mercury is still in the flu vaccine. I can't confirm or deny whether it's in the latest shot that people are being offered. Mercury can get into our body through the vaccines. It can get into our body from the silver fillings in the mouth. So it was in about the 1920s. Do you know mercury was banned in dentistry for about 300 years? There's a little book called Slow Death by Rubber Duck, and it's a Canadian book, and it looks at all the different environmental poisons we're exposed to. It's got a very good chapter on mercury, and they show in there that mercury was banned for 300 years, and then 3 dentists from Europe came over and started their own association, the American Dental Association. Before that it was the American Association of Dental Surgeons. So they opened their own and they legalised mercury. If you have mercury fillings in your mouth, my suggestion is to find a biological dentist who's aware of the dangers and so can take it out. You can also Google the smoking tooth. Google the smoking tooth and you'll see just a few-minute little video clip of this screen that they've developed that picks up the mercury coming off teeth. So they've got a tooth there with a big mercury filling in it, and they pour very hot water in, like when people drink very hot drinks, and you see the mercury fumes coming off. I was reading the report of a man who had his mercury filling taken out after 25 years. When it went into his mouth, it was 50% mercury. When they took it out, it was 25% mercury. Where's the mercury gone? It's a fact that that mercury leaches into the system. And when mercury leaches into the system, it has the ability to break down that myelin sheath. It even has the ability to kill the nerve cell. Mercury can also be coming into the human body through fish. There's hardly a fish that isn't safe today. I think you'll agree with me. We're going to show you how to make the food fantastic. We can talk about food now. Drugs never cure disease, they just change the form and location of disease. I appreciated that story that the policeman told me in the airport in Pittsburgh on early Sunday morning. On Nexium for many years. He saw my lectures and he realised he didn't need Nexium, he needed to boost his hydrochloric acid. And this is exactly what he said. He said, I then knew it was a scam. Mm-hmm. Yes, drugs may play a role in a crisis, but they never cure disease. Also, chemicals. Got to get the chemicals out of our clothes, out of our personal care products, out of our cleaning products, out of our foods. Little by little, they're coming in like the dripping top on a stone, eating away at body function, damaging our arteries, killing our brain cells. We've got to get them out. Electromagnetic field excess. We are electrical people. There's a spark of electricity in every cell. It's the excess that the problem is. I was reading a report of a breast surgeon. He said it's alarming the amount of young women who are coming in with breast cancer in the breast where they put their phone in the bra. You can even buy a sports bra today with a pocket for the phone. And protect the family jewels. We had a young man with testicular cancer, only 35, and for the last 10 years he'd driven his sports car with his laptop on his lap. They also discovered that young girls, you know, from teens or adolescents, teens, laptop on the lap, then while in their 30s, 46% miscarriage in the girls that had the laptop on their lap while those eggs were developing. So the worst place to put your laptop is on your lap. Put it on the bench, put it somewhere away. Keep that away as much as you possibly can. One lady said, "What am I going to do? There's big power lines near my house." I said, "I'd sell the house." Did you know that 50 years ago you could not build a house under those huge power lines? But you look today, they're the cheapest houses in the housing estate. But if you investigate the people that live there, they are not well. And it can happen in many different ways. And be careful on the children's exposure. Their brains aren't as thick as ours. Do you want me to tell you the Russian standard? The Russian standard is, I think it's under the age of 5, 0 exposure. Is that happening in our country? No. So they keep the children quiet. Keeps the children quiet till you try and take it away from them. Under the age of 10, it's about 15 minutes a day. Getting up to 18, I think it's coming up to about 1.5 to 2 hours a day. Yet I don't think there's children in America who are experiencing that. You know, the best thing for children is a sand pit, and let them go outside and play in the sand pit. That's the best place for children. Now, some helicopter mothers say, "Don't climb the tree, you'll fall down and break your neck. Don't ride the bike, don't go on the jump, you might have an accident. Come inside and play the computer games." Do you know they can recover from a scrape? They can recover from a broken leg, but what's going into their brain, very difficult for them to recover from that. In fact, you talk to people who work with young people in addictions, the worst addiction they're saying that exceeds any other addiction is the addiction to Facebook and the addiction to games. They said far surpasses drug addiction. And how does it start? Yes, the lung cancer begins with one cigarette. The addictions start with one. So we never had games, never had games. But you know, Michael and I'd take the kids rock climbing, mountain climbing. That's worth it. They're all gone now. And you know what I noticed that our kids do? They do the same thing with their kids. We've got to realise where the true danger lies. It's called the silent killer because you cannot see it. So be very careful on your exposure. Mould, we looked at the danger of mould. Now I think you'll agree with me that's a very socially acceptable list. Is that right? No need for me to talk to you about the dangers of methamphetamines, ice, heroin, marijuana. There's no need to talk about those dangers, but cyanide, arsenic, but there's definitely a need to be aware of the dangers of these. Again, we get back to what the Bible calls the devil and Satan. He's deceived the whole world. The great deceiver. What's deceptions? Not as it seems. And that's why abstain is one of the laws of health, and moderation is also a law of health. Tomorrow, we're going to look at nutrition. We've looked at sleep. Tomorrow we're looking at nutrition. We're spending the whole morning on nutrition. We're going to look at the acid-alkaline balance, and we're also going to look at fantastic fats. And then on Friday, we're going to be looking at water and exercising. And on Saturday morning, we're going to go to the mind and look at the importance of mind and health. My time is now up, and I thank you very much for your attention this morning. Thank you.
Hang on to your seats, please, for a second. I want to get a picture of all of you from up here, but then I do have something to say. You know, it's so awesome having all these windows, right? But do you know what the downside is?
No?
Not very good pictures.
Oh.
Okay, but we'll take the lighting. There are plumbing issues down at the schoolhouse at Carter.